Anyway, today is finally, we have no sponsors. Mother's Day, no one wanted a sponsor. The Dvar Chizuk and other is Mother's Day. Oh, you love. Okay, but meanwhile, we have several birthdays. Ahuva Moss, and finally, I get it right, Ariel Rosenblum. We finally got it right. I wish him happy birthday 3 times already, but today we get it. I'd never ask him for everybody. And Ahuva, may everyone be good and happy. Give your parents a lot of nachas, happy, healthy, and have a long life and become a great Talmid Chacham and a good Jew and everything else that goes with it. Okay. So today happens to be Mother's Day. I don't know if anyone remembered. Yeah. Baruch Hashem, my mother is still, may she be blessed and be around for a long time. 96 and going strong, the mind a little bit, but whatever. She's still, a mama is a mama, even if she doesn't remember who I am. And, I just saw a little, someone, I get every week, someone dropped it off, the Torah Savigdar, the little pamphlet from Rabbi Miller. So they asked him, what is the Torah's view of Mother's Day and Father's Day? So he gives the whole thing, and he says, now Mother's Day doesn't have any significance based on historical reasons or some religious grounds. Mother's Day is not guaranteed by the Constitution, by the way. It was nothing but a ploy of the businessman. That's all it is. Now you mothers will have to forgive me for being so crass and vulgar, but that's the plain truth. He goes on. Then he says, well, listen, at the end of the day, now that it's here, he says, certainly it's not something you have to ignore, and for the sake of harmony, it pays to do and celebrate it. So for the sake of harmony, we're going to celebrate it. And I want to say a few kind words about women and mothers, because without them, I don't think you'd survive COVID. I think all of you guys would survive COVID and the families. And so a little tribute to the mothers. Now, the truth is, it doesn't always work out, but we usually talk about the Sphira. So the Sphira that we're going into, I usually talk about the one we're going to head into, is Netzach Shebahid. Netzach Shebahid. Now, of course, Haid is, as I said, that quiet, inner, contemplative, peaceful thoughtfulness that radiates outwards. Can you think of anyone that description fits than our dear mothers? No question. And the truth is, we say it in Eishes Chayil. Eishes Chayil, everyone makes a mistake. Everyone thinks Eishes Chayil is a tribute to David HaMelech, Shlomo HaMelech wrote to his wife. No, it's a tribute to his mother Batsheva. That's the Pshutei Shamirka. Eishes Chayil Mi'imsa is a tribute to his mother. And what does he say? Haid v'hada levusha. And which Haid is Netzach, if not a mother? Mother gives us life, gives us everything. And, that's what a mother carries us. It's a beautiful Radak. I was going to fetch it. The Radak asks in Tilim Kufhei, when David HaMelech talks about disappointment and upset, he used the metaphor of grief. He says, like a grief, like someone who, God forbid, who lost a mother. And the Radak says, why a mother more than the father? Why mother? He says, because the mother is there from the moment of your conception. From the moment you exist, she carries you. And she nurtures you after you're born. And she never leaves you, even till the last day. And it even goes beyond, because mothers never stop. And there's nothing like a Yiddish mama. We're so fortunate, and may we continue to be fortunate. Those of us who have memories of mothers should maintain the memory of those mothers are here. Hashem should bless us that we should get the chizuk we get just from being near my mother. My mother doesn't really, we don't have much. We talk, we try to reminisce, but she doesn't really talk. But just the look in her eye when I'm in a company is something that gives me chizuk. So I want to say a little. I saw a beautiful thing my daughter showed me over Shabbos. A beautiful thought from Reb Mordechai Nogeshel. I don't know if any women here went to seminaries in Eretz Yisrael. He was famous. He's a famous philosopher, speaker. He teaches a lot of seminaries. Actually, in the seminary I headed years ago, he was also, that's where I got to know him personally. He wrote a book, and in it he asks, it's questions and answers. One of the questions he asks him, how come in Tanakh, there are very few women in relative to men? There's very few women featured. And in the Gemara and the Mishnah, even less. So he says like this, he says a beautiful thought. He says, in the Midbar, we got 3 gifts. We got the Be'er, we got the Mun, the Mana, and the Anani covered the glory, the Kazakh. The Be'er was in the Schos of Miriam, the Mun in the Schos of Moshe, Anani Akav is Schos Aaron. So he says, Sukkot, we have a memory for the Anani Kavod. We have Sukkot, that we know. We have a memory for the Mon, Lechem Mishnah. We use Lechem Mishnah every Shabbos is to commemorate the Mon. How come we don't make any Zecher for the Be'er? And he says, the truth is, of all the three gifts, that was the most critical one. We could have lived without the Anania cover. We could have lived without the Mon. There was food available. But one thing they didn't have was water. They didn't have water. How did they travel in the desert? Water. You can get food, buy food. But water, how do you get water in the desert? So he says, what's the pshat? So he says, what's the pshat? So he says like this. He heard this, and this is from Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu, Chusay Yagan Aleinu, one of our members in the shul, a Talmud of his, Rabbi Dani Kermaya, learned by him, received smicha from him. Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu, he writes, he says, water is, we got water in the Chus of Miriam. He says, water is like a woman. They're everywhere. Everything's, you can't exist without water, even though you don't see it. He says, even in building material, there has to be moisture. In electricity, you need water is what turns some of the water generates the flow. Fruits, vegetables, everything is absorbed with water. Everything without water, the world doesn't exist. But it's not that visible. It's not visible. So he says, what does that mean? Because that's really, so even if, like Mother's Day is every day, that's the truth. And even though we do celebrate it, and it's certainly appropriate to celebrate it, a person should celebrate it. But the truth is, every day is Mother's Day. And women and motherhood is something that goes unnoticed. And not unnoticed, it's not as visible, but we notice it, and we should pay attention. It's like Mayim. And he points out, and he says like this, he says, if you look through Tanakh, there are many positive male figures, but there are many villains too. But in Tanakh, generally, the stereotype women are mothers. The Miriam, especially Miyaldes, she was Zered Batikuna, Leviah, Malchus. From her came out. She was like the mother of royalty. But by men, you have Yeravam, Dasan Aviram, Achav. And by the women, there's all the women, the stereotypes are the Mois HaKadosh, Miriam, Batsheva, and others, Dvar is Menekes, Rivka, and some say Dvar was actually her mother. And at any rate, there are very few, or any, if any, negative stereotypes of women, because the truth is, because that's the nature of mothers and women and motherhood. And the Yiddish mama, who is women are the essence of what we all are. They carry us, they nurture us, and they pray for us. I remember my mother, I was thinking back today, my mother's, may she live and be well. I never remember, honestly, thinking back, I never remember getting up, my mother wasn't there. I never remember going to sleep, my mother wasn't up. But the Shabbos, I can't remember my mother ever, sleeping late or getting up late. She was always there, And even in her old age, I had several of my kids live with my parents for a while. There was a chair in the front window that she would always sit in till the last person came home, even if it was late. She would doze off, of course. She would fall asleep. She was always there. She never went to sleep till the last person came home. And that's a mother, Yiddish mom. So I want to say, first of all, a beautiful story I saw. I really recommend. It's one of the most inspiring books I've ever read, and entertaining and enjoyable is Rabbi Jungreis. But she brings a story about her own mother. Because she was obviously, Rabbi Jungreis was known. She became, later on in life, they called her the Bubby of Klal Yisrael. But she was, there's so many stories about how she was like a mother figure to so many. And she brings a story here. Obviously, mothers come from mothers, and it's a legacy. She brings a beautiful story, I think, touches up what a Yiddish mama is. So she writes in the 70s, her parents had a shul in Canarsie. I remember, Rabbi Jungreis had a shul in Canarsie. And one day they were visiting Rebbe Jungreis, and she gets a call that someone frantic is saying, and said, "Is your parents there?" He says, "Yes." He says, "I'm sorry to tell you bad news, but the shul is on fire." Now these are people who survived the Holocaust, and they rebuilt their lives and raised children, and they said so. They ran there, and the shul's on fire, and it would turn out it was arson actually. So imagine people survived the Holocaust and someone burned down the shul intentionally. And when they ran home, they went there, and it was silent, very quiet. And her father had a pair of tefillin that he has given as his bar mitzvah from his great grandfather, Reb Jungreis' great grandfather. And the entire night, he wouldn't come home till 2 a.m. He was searching for the tefillin. The whole shul burnt down. He knew because he had a promise. His grandfather, his great grandfather, when he gave it to him, his grandfather gave it to him, said, "This is going to guide you and it's going to protect you, and it's going to take you through life, and no matter what whatever you'll find." And indeed, he found it. Meanwhile, so she writes, says, "What about Mama? What was going on?" I mean, imagine, frantic. The shul's burnt down. People are hovering around. They live near the shul. The father's rummaging through the fire, the ash, looking for the tefillin, which he found because he hid in her Kodesh, and everything was burned, even the Sefer Torah, but that remained. So she writes, "What about Mama? Where was she? What was she doing while Zaidi was busy searching the ashes for her tefillin?" As in every moment in life, now too, Mama had no time to waste. She was in the house, standing in the kitchen. She was doing what she knew how to do best, baking cookies and taking care of people. She stood at the counter and started baking cookies, baking and crying, rolling the dough and crying, mixing all the ingredients together and wiping the tears from her eyes. The Rebbetzin found the mother baking the cookies. "Mama, what are you doing? Why are you baking cookies right now?" "People are going to come," she said, "and help us now that the shul burnt down. They're going to be hungry. You'll see, every cookie will be eaten." It was that simple. Some people dwell on their misfortunes. Others turn everything around and comfort those in pain, even as their own hearts are breaking on the inside. That was my mother, she cites. It was the way she acted in Szeged, that's how she was, and Bergen-Belsen and other stories she writes about her, what she did, miraculous stories, and in Canarsie, even her late life, so beautiful. I think that encapsulates what many of us know when our mothers are and their devotion. I want to just close with its Erev tonight, we're going to transitioning. Erev Lag Baimer. So a beautiful story. It's a famous story. I want the kids to hear it because I'm not sure if they ever heard it. It's a fantastical story, but it's documented. And the person who was there and saw it was a famous Yid. His name was Rabbi Shai Oshazel Magulis. He died in 1969. He was a Makubal, and he had Yeshiva Makubalim, and he came, a fascinating story. And the short story was that he was very devoted to Rav Shimon Yochai. He was there, many stories about him and the different kids at the halakas and cutting the hair. And he wrote a sefer. He wrote a sefer about, about the minig of going to Miram and doing haircuts for the children. He wrote some 30 svarim. And in his sefer, he writes this story that he was there when the story happened. A fantastic tale. And it's a tribute to a mother. And that's why I want to close for today. Because the truth is, okay, I'll tell you at the end. He says it happened to be that Lag Baimer was on a Friday. So anyone who came for Lag Baimer to celebrate had to stay there for Shabbos. So you can imagine it was a spirit of Shabbos. They were davening, and it was spirit, and they were about to finishing Musaf, and suddenly a woman on the roof gives out a shriek, and everyone turns to them, and they were all going to go to Kiddush and eat, and it was a festive, and suddenly they hear a shriek, and they hear a woman crying and holding her lifeless body of a little boy who just had a haircut the day before, and a doctor was summoned to see what was going on. The child had turned green, which was sort of evidence of cholera, which was prevalent at the time, and they declared him dead. A doctor declared he was dead. So the protocol was, it's a story, relevant story, Magefa, they shut down, there was a lockdown. You can imagine people escaped, kids who were separated from their parents. It was havoc, it was grief, it was everything, it was a terrible. And the noise was getting louder, and suddenly, then the mother's crying the whole time, and no one can even move. And he describes the following. He says, suddenly the mother's crying stopped. She took the body of a child in her arms and marched down to the steps, went straight to the tzin. Everyone's watching this. The tzin of Shimon Yochai. She put the little body on the floor right next to the tzin. He said, then bending over with a bitter cry and shrieking voice, she called out, Oy, tzaddik, tzaddik, Rav Shimon Yochai. Behold, your maidservant. She had made a promise. This was her only child, and she waited many years to have a child. So, and she promised that when he would have a chalaka, a haircut, she'd bring it to. She says, your maidservant came in honor to perform the chalaka of my first son, my only child, that Hashem granted me in your merit. Because she said, if you give me a child, I'll come bring him and she had a child. And that was the only child I had. And I kept the vow that I made to bring him here on Lag Baimer. Yesterday, I brought him alive. I performed the chalaka with music and drums and harps and everything and dancing. How can I leave without my child? How can I come back? After that, she broke out, crying for a long time. Her wailing induced everyone to cry along with her. Then she stood up and said, Tzaddik, Tzaddik, I'm leaving him here just as he is. I beg you, please do not embarrass me. Do not turn away me empty-handed. Return him to me alive and healthy, exactly as I brought him to you yesterday. And Hashem's name will be exalted in the world. At the conclusion of the words, she walked out of the Beis Knesset. She walked out, and that enclosed the scene, and the body trial was left there all alone, and they had to lock the doors because they were quarantining. After a few minutes, suddenly a sound was heard from behind the door. It was a sound of a child calling for his mother. The Chacham in charge opened the door. The child was standing on his feet. This happened in 1926, and the person who wrote it was the aide Ria, a first-hand account, documented. When he saw his mother, he simply asked for water. She herself was overcome. She picked him up and quickly took him back on the roof. Everyone who witnessed it, they made a bracha. And the doctor came to examine the child, and he said, it's a miracle. He said there was nothing but a miracle. He had to admit it was a miracle, and the lockdown was removed. And the Kiddush Hashem took place on that day. And he says that the short time afterwards, and he published his little book called Hilul Rabbi, he came across, he found the source in Minchas Haluza, the Munkacher says that Shimon ben Yochai equals Mechayim Esav. It's the same gematria. And I think, the Gemara, it says in this song about Bar Yochai, Ashrei Eladatei, it's because his mother, the Medrash says that his mother prayed to have a child like Shimon Yochai. The Gemara said, Rava, when he heard something from Rav Shimon Yochai, he says, you should be praised, mother should be praised to have a child like Shimon Yochai. There's a connection, and maybe he knew, and maybe there was a tribute. Maybe it was the kaich of a mother who brought Rav Shimon Yochai, and he heard the cries of the mother who nurtured and brings children into the world, who raised their children to greatness. It's there, quiet, sometimes unseen, like water, the life force that we all owe so much tribute to. May we all be zeicha to give tributes to our mothers, to our wives who are our children's mother, and mothers, and may we share in many, many simchas. May they continue to enliven our lives, not just by bringing the children into the world, but by their whole spirit and their positiveness and their encouragement till the last day and beyond. Racham Avak Abana never stops. May we be zeicha to celebrate our mothers, whether they're here or not, for a long time to come until Tchias HaMeisim. I'm going to unmute everyone.